Versailles has played an unforgettable part in the history of France. From Sun King's dream palace to Marie Antoinette's leisure alcazar, and then a symbol of oppression during the French Revolution, Versailles has been a witness to the grandest and most turbulent times of French history. The seat of power for Louis XIV, Louis XV, and Louis XVI, it delivered justice and punishment to many, including Madame de Montespan and the man in the iron mask, the secret of whose identity has troubled historians for ages. But what was the justice system of Versailles like? What punishments were used back in those days of France? How were torment and penalization implemented in Bastille? Welcome to Nutty History. Today, let's have a look at punishments that were common during the rule of Versailles. Nothing is more eponymous to the French Revolution as Les Miserables and the guillotine. Interestingly, both are remembered for very different reasons. While we all love the piece of art that Les Miserables is, the guillotine sits on the exact opposite end of that spectrum. Considered a very extreme punishment, the guillotine was widely used during the Revolution in France and the following Reign of Terror. But it may come as a surprise to some that the purpose behind the invention of the guillotine was a complete contrast to what it became. Joseph Ignace Guillotine was a politician, physician, and a Freemason who, believe it or not, was a staunch oppositionist to capital punishment as well as the use of torment in prisons. In 1775, he advocated using criminals as medical experiment subjects instead of facing the stake or being gibbeted, boiled, or many other grim punishments. Yes, these methods were prevalent forms of capital punishment when France was ruled from the Palace of Versailles. The Game of Thrones-style punishments by axe or sword were only reserved for nobility. But similar to the gibbet and other horrible methods of capital punishment, a sword or axe didn't ensure an immediate death and would end up in a messy affair more often than not. A humanist, guillotine preferred prisoners to be subject to wacky and often side effect resulting experiments of 18th century medicine over them facing a painful demise. Legend has it that Guillotine was born prematurely because his mother was in distress after hearing the wails of a man facing death on the breaking wheel, a device used for extreme punishments that would stretch both sides of a person until, well, you get the picture. But Guillotine asserted that his reasoning behind his disdain for capital punishment was his experience in medicine. After his efforts to cancel capital punishments failed, he proposed that the need of the hour was a mechanism that may end life swiftly and as painlessly as possible. He hoped that a more humane and less painful method would be the first step toward total abolition. His proposal was, all punishments for the same category of crime shall be indifferent, regardless of the social status of the criminal. That means nobility would get no reprieve from the harshest punishment applicable on the basis of the right of birth. If a criminal is found guilty and is sentenced to death, the sentence should be carried out by detachment of the head by a machine and not a human. The family of the guilty party will not suffer any legal discrimination. It would be illegal for anyone to reproach the guilty party's family about their punishment. The property of the convicted shall not be confiscated, and the guilty deceased shall be returned to the family if so requested. Thus, in 1789, the guillotine was born, a tall mechanism that featured a sharp, heavy blade positioned at the top and a kneeling area for people to stick their heads through at the bottom. Once the blade came down, the punishment was served. At first, the machine was named Louis XVII, or Louis XVI, after its inventor, French surgeon and physiologist Antoine Louis, who designed it for the French court based on the concept proposed by guillotine. It became known as a guillotine somewhere near the French Revolution. Interestingly, the French underworld used to fittingly call it the widow. Though the mechanism visioned by guillotine became popular soon after its first use in 1792 and bore his name, his pleas for prisoners' rights took many years to be implemented. After being trialed on cadavers at the hospital of Bastille, it was erected on the Place des Graves for the punishment of a highwayman. But during the French Revolution and the Reign of Terror, the punishments became a spectacle. Interestingly, the 17,000 people whose tops were chopped by the guillotine included King Louis XVI and Maximilien Robespierre, who sent many to die under its blade. Ironic, isn't it? Guillotine tried to distance himself from the machine during the execution hysteria of the 1790s. Later, his family unsuccessfully petitioned the French government to change its name in the early 19th century. The use of the guillotine in France remained popular until the mid-20th century, only diminishing during the 1960s and 70s. In 1981, France outlawed capital punishment and abandoned the use of the guillotine. The French Sun King, Louis XIV, spent incredible amounts of fortunes to convert an unassuming honey lodge into his golden wonder palace. However, being remote from the city, sewage disposal was a huge challenge for the Palace of Versailles. This resulted in one of the most beautiful places of its time having a rank odor on the entire premise. But there was something more horrendous going on in Versailles than the horrible stench of defecation during the reign of Louis XIV. During the decades of 1660 and 1670, a number of influential members of the Sun King's court began dropping like flies. These deaths were not only unexpected, but suspiciously close to each other and carried the same MO. Calls for investigations led to autopsies showing signs of malice. The deceased insides were blackened and corroded, displaying the effects of poisons and possible witchcraft. Now you need to excuse their reasoning for such a prognosis, as these were still early times of the modern age, and Europe hadn't shed the medieval mentality completely just yet. I mean, we are literally going to talk about witch hunts that happened at this very time later in this video. So witchcraft is a cause of death here, okay? This series of deaths came to be known as the Affair of the Poisons, with the Queen Marie Theresa, wife of the Sun King, rumored to be one of the victims after her sudden demise. Investigations began with the arrest of Madeleine de Lagrange on charges of forgery and assassination in 1677. To save herself from the harshest sentence, Lagrange approached the Marquis of Louvois with the claim of having information about several crimes of high importance. With her testimony, the Pandora's box was open, and out came accounts of many poisonings that were committed to acquire estates and titles of close relatives. It began with what appeared to be an isolated case, but then door after door kept opening up, eventually implicating rich and poor alike. Over the course of 5 years between 1677 to 1682, 442 people were implicated, and 367 orders of arrest were issued. However, only 218 arrests were carried out, and 36 of them were put to death by either the rope, given the stake, or death by sword or axe. Another 5 were sentenced to the galleys based on their gender or being too young. Sentenced to the galley meant being sentenced to row galleys, as back then ships sailed on wind or manual power. France had 40 galleys that needed 260 rowers when Louis XIV was in power, and all the rowers were provided by the royal court through sentencing. This sort of punishment was mostly used against Protestants in order to set an example and promote fear so that they would turn to Catholicism. The Affair of the Poisons claimed 2 to 3 times more lives than the number of deaths at Salem 10 years later during the infamous witch trials across the Atlantic. Despite the involvement of witchcraft in the ugly Affair of the Poisons, the Sun King was not in favor of persecuting men and women in the name of magic, unlike many other Western rulers and nations. Yet, between 1550 and 1700, 2,000 witch trials occurred in France. The Normandy witch trials of 1669 to 1670 were perhaps the most notorious of French witch trials that troubled King Louis XIV. The province of Normandy was under the jurisdiction of the Parliament of Rouen, which was much more severe on witchcraft than the Parliament of Paris. Interestingly, the majority of witches in Normandy were men. Sponsored by the Parliament of Rouen, professional witch hunters arrived in Normandy in 1669 and captured a number of people, accusing them of witchcraft. 12 people were sentenced to death by the Parliament, and they were punished by prevalent contemporary means of death. Soon after, the Parliament condemned 24 more to death. The appeal of the victims' families reached the king, who issued an immediate pardon to all convicts, and the death sentence was converted to banishment. Unfortunately, there is no record of where these banished Frenchmen migrated. Would you like to know more about creepy and weird punishments from the past? Don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. And as always, thanks for watching Nutty History.